Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinar. We're happy to have everyone here. We look like we have a really great crowd today, which doesn't surprise me with Mike Williams hosting. Mike always draws a good crowd, probably one of our most upbeat advisors. If you ever have a bad day, you want to talk to Mike, he'll turn you around and cheer you up. So he's been through it all and he's seen it all. I'm just gonna just kind of ramble here for a minute. I'm watching everybody logging in. We just want to give a minute for everyone to come up on the webinar, but have a really great presentation today. And Mike's been really great to invite one of his hires from back in the day at Sony, Shaka Johnson, who's worked his way up through the system to become general counsel. One of a couple things that I love about your story, Shaka. One is you worked for Sony, you left to do other things, they recruited you back. One thing that sends a signal to me when I'm doing an assessment on someone is you obviously impressed them. They knew what they were getting into when they hired you back. They didn't hire you back as general counsel, but you ultimately rose to general counsel, which again says a lot. I mean, we're seeing more and more focus on succession planning, but still the companies do insist on doing a full search outside before they just promote from within. I'm sure Sony did that too, and to come out on top as being the most qualified person for the position, that's so commendable. So we're excited to get this going. Practical insights to increase your leadership skills and grow your career. Perfect webinar for everyone. Yes, leadership skills and the ability to take on more and more responsibility are key indicators that you're ripe and ready for the general counsel role. So really great program that we have today. I'll introduce Mike in just 1 minute. I just want to let everyone know we are recording this today, so that and it will be featured on our website in no time in the next couple of weeks. Averill will be sending out an email to let everyone know when the summary and the recording are up live for this, for you to take a look at. And we really do encourage people to share it with their friends. As everyone knows, our GC Advantage program is really geared toward helping everyone optimize their performance, being able to be viewed as a strategic advisor, and hopefully advance your career because of it. So we're really proud of the program. We love seeing the attendance go higher every single month. So that's really great. Really good. And last, I just want to promote our upcoming webinar. We have Marla Persky. Marla, the number of comments I get from people that she coaches, she has a 5 out of 5 rating for coaching. She brings some really great insight. And she's bringing a CLO and a CCO to talk about artificial intelligence and the practical tips for balancing risk and reward. So I'm hearing all the time, I get calls from the different magazines, different subscriptions out there for legal, in-house legal. And one of the things that seems to be one of the topics that everyone's concerned about or interested in is artificial intelligence. So I think that program should be a great one coming up at the end of October. So and one more thing as far as questions and answers, April's great about keeping me in check because I'm a poor script reader. Questions and answers. Feel free to ask questions throughout. All you have to do is scroll down, ask a question. We'll be looking at them. Hopefully we can catch them during the presentation. And then we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end to catch some of the questions. We can't answer all of the questions. If you have something that you feel you didn't get the answer to and you really want insight, feel free to send us an email and we'll get right back to you and have a personalized session to share some details with you. So all that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and let him run with this great program, and then he'll introduce Shaka. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. And good afternoon and good morning to all our fellow crime fighters out there. It's great to be back. And as John mentioned, I used to be at Sony and then I was at Staples. But when I was at Sony, I had the pleasure and good fortune of recruiting a young man out of Gateway Computer that's going back a few years. And that was Shaka Johnson. So Shaka's with me. And Shaka, why don't you just introduce yourself quickly to the folks here?
Sure. I am a San Diego native, born and raised. Went to law school at USD, which I'm sure Mike is proud of. I started off my career in litigation at a firm here in San Diego back in 2003. I've been practicing since then, so about 21 years, and I've been in-house for about 18 of those. I started at Gateway in '06. I went to Sanyo. I had the pleasure of joining Sony the first time. Left Sony to join what was then Facebook to support Oculus and the VR legal group back when they were putting together a legal team to support the VR and eventually the AR VR business. Before they were called Meta, I departed and came back to join Sony in a leadership opportunity, and now today serve as General Counsel and Secretary at Sony Electronics.
Well, thank you, Shaka. Well, as you can hear from Shaka's background, and my practice has been a little bit longer. I started practicing law shortly after the earth cooled. At least that's if you ask my children. But anyway, wanted to say what we're going to talk about today in leadership. And in terms of leadership, the lessons that we're going to talk about, the features and everything else, whether you're a big company or a small one, it doesn't matter. They're going to be applied whatsoever. So with that said, I want to start off with a picture of a gosling. Now, not to be confused with this gosling, ladies and gentlemen, but why do I pick a gosling to start the discussion? Well, as many of you may know, when a gosling is born, it will follow anybody, okay? Because leadership is not a natural trait. Goslings will follow dogs, humans, or their mother. But leadership is something that you have to learn. It's a skill that you have to hone, and it's always taking work. It's an evolutionary process. And with that thinking, okay, that you understand leadership is something about work, I want to ask Shaka, Shaka, why do people or why do you lead? Let's start with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a variety of reasons folks lead, whether natural or unnatural. First, for some of us, frankly, it's your job, right? Like you have to, you're required to lead. It's part of the role. The second, though, is sometimes it's not your job. Sometimes you're told to lead. You have to lead. Somebody has to do it. You have to do it. And building on the someone has to do it, one of the other reasons is frankly, no one else is around to do it. And without a leader, chaos can ensue. And so sometimes we find ourselves leading because you just have to. Another, you're a senior person present, right? You look around the room and you decide, and that kind of touches to number 3, right? No one else is available. You're the most senior one at the table. Take over, lead. 5, you're the expert, right? You know what you're talking about, you know what you're doing, you're the best at predicting what's going to happen next. You find yourself leading because of that. And the last is really sort of more what I think is the more natural evolution of leadership and why to lead is you love to lead. It's something you're interested in doing and why you're doing it. Each of these you're choosing, right? Whether it's your job, whether you're told, whether no one else is available, et cetera, you love, you have chosen it. Leadership is a choice. And when you choose to do it, obviously you want to do it well. There's some qualities, Mike and I have discussed this, and I think many people here who are either interested and on a leadership journey probably agree. One of the things I have found in reading and thinking about leadership for myself, as well as how others do it, a lot of similarities seem to continue to rise to the top of what makes a good leader. Starting first, of course, with selflessness, concern more with the needs of those around you, the wishes of those around you, caring, acting with less concern for yourself than you do for others, right? Being out front, but allowing other people to be ahead of you. The next is courage. In here we have moral in parentheses, but it's courage to say what needs to be said, to stand behind your values, and to do what needs to be done. All of that takes courage. And last, it's almost like these are all directly connected to each other, is integrity. I've found that if you can set your baseline of values and follow that, you always have sort of a North Star to fall back on for yourself, for your team, or for the group with whomever you're leading. So between these qualities, I think you get to be a leader. And in the fourth, right, we said there's four qualities, is knowing the difference between leading and managing. And I've talked to folks about this before, and sometimes it's a head scratcher. Well, what's the difference? Managing is doing things right. Leadership can be doing the right thing. Managing is being in the present. Leadership is making choices that create a better future. Right? Managing is the person checking off, the task list, and leadership is deciding what's the strategy behind what tasks need to be created. The job title, the phrase I always like to use is influence over authority, right? The job title makes you a manager. What you do and the people around you is what makes you a leader. Again, coming back and tying to the earlier slides, leadership is a choice.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, Shaka, is that the job title gets you the entree, gets you in the door. People think, oh, he's going to be our leader today. But it's by your activities, your integrity, your moral courage when you're given the chance to demonstrate that type of courage with your team, that you're putting the organization above your own personal needs. When you demonstrate those characteristics, that's when people say, yes, he is a leader, he or she is someone that I want to follow, because you're making those choices. Now, besides those internal qualities that Shaka mentioned, there are some external behaviors or attitudes that I found to be present in leaders of all types and in all sizes or different types of organizations. And to talk briefly about it, I'd probably say the first one, most important one, is fix the problem, not the blame. So often when a problem goes or something goes bad in a company and you're in the legal department, it's going, who screwed up? Who's at fault? And a good leader steps back and says, I got to fix the problem, not the blame. And I always think about the little Dutch boy. He's walking home to the village at night. There's a hole in the dike. The water's pouring in. And what he takes his finger and he sticks it in the dike to stop the flood. He fixes the problem. He didn't sit there and say, okay, who did the spec job on this dike? Who built it? What was it defective? Let's go sue him. No, he didn't say that. He fixed the problem. And the next day, the villagers helped him. All right. So don't engage in the blame game. It's so easy to fall into that trap. But believe me, at the end of the day, when the problem has been solved, your team will look back and say, you know what? Mike focused on fixing the problem, not the blame. Another one, I'd rather do it right than right away. Good leaders are never going to compromise their standards. Set and maintain the high standard for yourself, for your department, for the project that you're working on. Don't cut corners. It's not going to be worth it in the end. And again, you're demonstrating leadership by the way you're acting to your team. They know that you're not one to take the easy route or the shortcut. A good leader, when given a task, looks at his or her watch, not the calendar. All right. A good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan executed tomorrow. That particularly is so important in the business world, where business people, they don't want a 20-page single-space type memo on the rule of law or whether or not we can do this. They want to know, like, what's the best plan we can do today? And also think about this, and it's what I learned when I was at Sony. When you're dying of thirst, it's too late to think about digging a well. A good leader, you need to be proactive. You need to think ahead and look around corners. Just like you're thinking about, how do I hone my leadership skills by attending this webinar, you may think AI is a very important piece in the future. Maybe I should go to the next AI seminar or bone up on that subject. But think about it, because CEOs really appreciate when their lawyers are thinking ahead. And of course, never forget, this is very important as a leader, okay, that even monkeys fall out of trees. Yes, that is me as a monkey, because I had fallen off several trees in my life and my career. But everyone makes mistakes. And believe me, I made a mistake in front of Mr. Akio Morita, the co-founder of Sony, and he said to me, he looked at me and he just said, smiling, he said, Michael, even monkeys fall out of trees. Admit your mistake, learn from them, but just don't try to repeat them because everyone makes mistakes. Let's face it, we're human, even leaders. If we were perfect, we'd be CEOs, but that's another story. So anyway, Shaka, besides the leadership qualities, external and internal, what about work itself?
Yeah, this is a good one. And something I didn't have a chance to qualify earlier, and we'll probably talk about it throughout or at some point, is that one of the qualities I think that goes with leadership is recognition that we're not perfect, right? And it kind of is an extension of what you're saying. Learn from your mistakes and continue forward. And I point that out because this is one of the hardest jobs as a leader, whether it's as a general counsel, as whether just a leader in legal department or elsewhere, is setting and maintaining your priorities. And in doing that, a lot of us, especially in this digital age, do so by looking at the number of unread emails or the number of emails in our inbox. And the more we can reduce those, the more we think we've done a good job for the day, right? It's just like, have I checked things off my task list? And as Donald Rumsfeld once said, if you're working from your inbox, you're working on other people's priorities. One of the importances of setting and maintaining priorities and in leadership is our job as leaders is to set the priorities and be in control of what the strategy is, and not just work out of our outbox, working on other people's priorities, but instead setting the priorities we think are important. I have a box on a whiteboard that I refer to often that has a do now, do later, delegate, and don't do category to try to help myself visualize regularly how I'm setting my priorities, not just with my task list or the number of unread emails I have. But none of us are perfect and we have a lot of work to do. So it's one that I'm constantly working on to be better at.
Right. And I think one of the things I always think about when I think about that Donald Rumsfeld quote, Shock, is I've got a boss, I can't blow off or ignore his emails because he or she has priorities. But as you're saying, and as everyone should understand, it's in the context. Yes, we have a job to do, but also as a leader, you may be having, like I got to drive costs of outside counsel down by 10%. So out of your outboxes, what are you pushing out to get that task done? Besides maintaining and setting the priorities, which a leader should do for his or her organization, a good leader gives clear and concise communications. And that may be difficult sometimes for lawyers, but they've got to remember when the client asks you what time it is, don't tell them how to build a watch. That is the biggest complaint I've ever heard from business people. They'd say, like, hey, Shaka, what time is it? Shaka's going to say it's 2:00. He's not going to say, well, let me go on the internet and check with the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington to get the latest on the atomic clock, and then I'll double check it against Greenwich Mean Time to make sure that it's correct, and then I'll let you know. They don't want to know that. If they want to know, your business people want to know how you derive or came to the conclusion it's 2:00, they'll ask you. But efficient communication is always the key. So important for a leader to be clear and concise. I also mentioned that my litmus test when I was a trial lawyer in explaining things or asking questions or dealing with business, how would Laverne explain this to Shirley? Now, for some of you in the audience, you're probably saying, who is Laverne and who is Shirley? They were two television actresses or a sitcom of two working women in a brewery in Milwaukee, okay? But they had a very direct relationship in terms of explaining things simply. And I don't mean that as a leader, you need to be pedantic or condescending. No, not at all. But we don't have to use fancy legal terms when we're talking to business people. We don't have to say heretofore or thereafter or anything like that. How many lawyers do you know keep saying prior to? But do you hear human beings talk like that in a restaurant? Well, prior to my entree, I will have an appetizer. No, you say before. So just remember, leaders use clear, concise language. How about this one, Shaka? A big, big pitfall as a leader.
Yeah. First off, I love these cartoons and these visualizations. Another thing, aside from my whiteboard, I have on a running document that I call a parking lot with different cartoons that remind me of certain principles. But this is a funny one. This one goes kind of without saying, right? Like it's one of these things that everybody acknowledges, oh, you shouldn't micromanage. But then you have to actually put it into practice, and it's really, really hard to do. And I've found that one of the challenges, especially for lawyers, is we're trained to be incredibly detail oriented. And so our training tells us to care about the details, to focus on the details. And so it's really hard when we move further into leadership to ignore that training. And we can still pay attention to the details, but allow and trust people to do what they do. I have found in my own experience, sometimes it's natural for people to walk away, to delegate, to trust. And other times they're forced to do it because eventually they just don't have the capacity and the time to do it. But one thing that micromanaging can do is it can inhibit the value of the people on your team, right? The diversity of the minds, the diversity of the thought, and the diversity of the expertise. If we micromanage, it's like we're just doing our own, we're just trying to create what's the word, clones of ourselves, when the value is in having the differences in the opinions and the approaches. And so in avoiding micromanagement, there's a few examples that we can talk about, or not avoiding, but thinking through how to avoid micromanaging yeah.
So, so Shaka, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the hypo for you as the leader. The person comes in, merchandising needs a contract to sell Blue Buffalo products, or do you go through and give the laundry list?
This is a trick question. The answer is not the laundry list. What's interesting, I remember when I first started managing other attorneys and leading within legal, I did look at the laundry list. I did provide suggestions, and I found that it was incredibly unproductive. And I've gotten to the place where I've said, what are the red flags, if any? Is the business aware of the significant risks, right? I try to find really high level questions to allow, again, the experts on the team to trust what they do and to allow them to do what they do. Yeah.
Right. And then I should also mention, when we talk about micromanagement, it's easy to say don't micromanage, but I want to put it in the context of a problem that in the leadership class when I was a young Marine officer, we were given. Okay. And so your job as a lieutenant is you have a 15-foot flagpole, you're given one flag, 5 feet of rope, 2 privates, and a sergeant. How do you solve the problem? So, of course, all these young officers were saying, well, I'd have one private stand on the shoulders of the other private. I'd hand him the rope and I'd tell the sergeant to give them the flag. Instructors say, no, not the right solution, not the school solution. So finally, after fumbling around a little bit, someone finally came up with it and he said, oh, I know what I would do. He goes, simple. I'd hand the flag and rope to the sergeant and tell him I'll be back in 1 hour to check on the job. And the instructor said, that is the school solution. You're not micromanaging them, telling them how to do it, just what you want done. I want the flag up. They'll figure it out. So when you're ever given a task and you're about to start to delegate that, think to yourself, am I raising the flag or I'm just going to tell them what I want done? And if people need assistance, they'll ask their leader for help or guidance with contracts or anything else like we were just doing in that example. But micromanagement, like going back to what Shaka said about detail orientation, but we do need to supervise, and that's a key also, Shaka.
Yeah. And what's interesting, before I go into this slide, one of the questions that I noticed popped up, and sorry for a couple of the other questions we haven't addressed, but I think this one connects really directly. And the question is, how do you recommend handling a situation where someone on your team pushes you to give them the details? I will share the details. I mean, and I say that it sounds really simple, and it's not a matter of hiding the information or anything like that. It's one of the keys to leadership is being fluid. And if they need, some people need or want more detail because they're new, they're doing something different. And if you leave them out on an island, they feel like you're not leading them, you're just letting them be. So
Right.
there's a fine balance between micromanagement and what level of detail is micromanagement and what level of detail the person you're leading or supporting or group really needs. And so back to, this is why I highlighted, because there's so many places to say this. This isn't, we're not perfect. This isn't perfect. It's learning constantly on this leadership journey to learn which is the right time, and how much detail is appropriate for the situation.
Right. And one of the most important attributes of a leader is knowing your people and looking out for their welfare. And by knowing your people, you may have a person that needs that extra assistance when you're giving them the task of the contract, Shaka, and say, here's an example of a prior vendor purchase agreement that we have done that has a lot of the information that you may need, and they can work through that. And if they have questions, they can come back to you, because you do want to see if they have some initiative and independent thinking. But there's other instances, if you know your person, you're not going to teach them how to swim if you got a Michael Phelps on your team, right? I mean, let's face it. But
right.
it goes
That's
back
right.
to being a good leader, knowing your people and looking out for their welfare, and the capability. So you're not going to throw them in the deep end of the pool and say swim, and oh, I don't know how to.
Yeah.
But
And
going back to yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and I found myself on both sides, right? Where I've given too much or too little. And it never feels great when you don't hit the right balance. But again, it's a constant journey. And in my mind, I'm constantly trying to figure out where the right balance is for the circumstances.
Right.
Um,
And we all
and
make mistakes.
that's right. So speaking of not being perfect, when to supervise is key to being a successful leader, right? And it's kind of an extension of what we've been talking about. But really, it's the classic: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. What gets measured gets done. Trying to find objective and achievable measures to identify what is being done. Are we doing it well? Are we doing it bad? Are we succeeding or failing? And this is really hard for lawyers. I find this one really challenging from a legal perspective. Certainly, there's a lot of tangible things we can point to: budgets, timelines, etc. And there's a lot of intangible things that we do as leaders that are very subjective, with regards to legal efforts, subjective as to whether we're doing it well or not. And so I try to, when it's not tangible, I try to identify efforts to achieve. And so those efforts to achieve help us to say, are we achieving that initiative? Are we achieving that North Star? Are we advancing the business with this type of guidance? But obviously trying to find ways to measure things is always preferred and beneficial.
It is indeed a very difficult thing, but so far we've covered, we know leadership is a choice. We know the qualities that a good leader has in terms of integrity, credibility, but also one of the more important features that we'll talk about is the leader must be trustworthy. And the reason why Shaka is in the position in today is because he earned the organization and his clients' trust. And when you think about trustworthiness, there are many books written about the trusted advisor and being a trusted person. But when you think about trustworthiness, think of it as your personal brand. A leader looks at trustworthiness as that is my personal brand. It is part of me. And trustworthiness as that personal brand is nothing more than a promise. When you think about it, when I remember the days at Sony, our brand was extremely, and it's still extremely important to the company. And the brand conveyed not the product itself, but the promise of quality, the promise of performance, the promise of cutting edge technology. For you as a leader, you're promising performance, that you're going to perform the task that you've been assigned. You're going to have a performance, a promise of credibility, that you're actually credible at what you're doing. You're going to have a promise of integrity, as we talked about earlier, that you're going to not be cutting corners or shading the truth. Again, a promise of integrity and also a promise of reliability. All these elements, if you look at them for a leader, in order to be trustworthy as your personal brand, think of it. Trustworthiness equals performance plus credibility plus integrity plus reliability. That's what you have. And trust is so important to obtain and to maintain, because the old saying is, trust leaves on a horse and returns by foot. So be careful that you don't overpromise, but you make sure you protect your personal brand of trustworthiness. Now, in terms of leadership, Shaka, what are the things that you find in the consensual part of the leadership equation?
Yeah, and leadership, again, it's influence over authority. And with that, folks, you choose to lead and folks choose to support their leader and vice versa as the leader supports them. I think first there's kind of two sides, right? And they both, if you were to add them together, they equal care. But first is reason, right? And the second is emotion, right? And when you put those two things together, the logic and the care, that helps you create some of that consensual nature of the relationship that leadership is. One of the next things is sharing beliefs and vision. I think this one's critical. Even if folks don't see it right away, or appreciate it right away, it's knowing where you want to go, right? A leader has at least an idea of where you want to go and shares that. If people don't know where they're going or why they're going, it's going to be really difficult to lead, because where are you leading to? So this one's really big for me. One of my visions is that our legal team should always be advancing the business and protecting the company. And everything comes back to that, to a point where it's almost a running joke within my team, because I say it anytime I can find a way, just like I did just now. But it's really important, because it says, what are we doing? Is it advancing the business? We can protect the company, but if it's not advancing the business, it's kind of, how do those two things go together? And the next is knowing the purpose, right? And this one, I remember I mentioned this to someone years ago. I said, hey, I'm trying to identify not just our North Star, not just our vision of advancing the business, protecting the company. Why are we doing that? What's our purpose? And they kind of looked at me with confusion and said, yeah, but just when's the contract due? And so it's having a purpose, right? And to me, purpose is, what's the value? What's the reason to want to advance the business? What's the reason to want to be here? And I have found a lot of times, the better you can answer this, whether for yourself or for your team, the more motivating it can be, and the more directive sometimes it can be. And it creates a little more trust, a little more space for safety, and a little more space to create that influence over authority. Finally, here is always improving. It's a journey, as I mentioned earlier, and it's always on that journey to be better at what we do as a team, as a person, as individuals, and in our relationships. Years ago, throughout my career, I have found places where I was doing work that I really, quite frankly, didn't like, but I did it anyway. And I was learning how to be better at this and learning how to be better at that. And I would get through it, and whether it was document review or dealing with a subject area that really just didn't interest me. And then some way, somehow, for some reason, it popped up again, 2, 3, 4, 10 years down the road. And I was better at it when it did, because of those times. And it gave me this sort of, no matter what I'm doing, I'm always trying to get better. So when you're doing something that may be mind-numbing, when you're doing something that's painful, challenging, or concerning, know that one day, somehow, some way, it might make you better. One of the books I read, without knowing these two things were connected, called Obstacle is the Way. It was sort of like, anything worth doing is usually on the other side of an obstacle. And so kind of having that mindset not only makes it easier, or at least more bearable, to get through an obstacle, to get through a challenge, it also helps you learn in real time and learn for the future, and constantly be improving.
Right. And also I'd say, Shaka, in terms of the good leaders knowing the job. So as you might remember, and everyone should, that our job, what's your job? To provide, legal advice and guidance at a reasonable, cost-effective price so the business unit can accomplish its goal. That was sort of like, that's my job. I'm an in-house lawyer, boom. But then you say, what's your purpose? My purpose is to help build a sustainable business for the future. That's where you're taking the bigger picture. And the leader knows that. And the leader looks to that for their organization. And so I've got a job, but more importantly, I have a purpose. And when you act with that purpose in mind, it naturally flows that people say, yes, they are a leader. And that's very important. So then we have inspiration. I mean, it's just like you said before, it's partly emotion. But what about the inspiration side of the equation, Shaka?
It's inspiration isn't always getting somebody to run through a brick wall, and it's really as simple as building on the trust and wanting to do a particular thing or task. Here's a quote from Eisenhower about leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. It's the consent. Oftentimes I'll ask open-ended questions in an effort to engender that, right? To engender a voluntary, yes, I want to do, or yes, I think we should do, rather than directive. And I've had at times people question my willingness to be direct, question my willingness to be authoritative. And I've tried to explain, if given the opportunity, no, I think it's better if somebody wants to do it rather than just telling them to do it. I am somewhat, for those sports fans out there, as an example, and I know we have the time, so I'm going to give a really quick example from years ago. And I won't say who or the team at the moment, but some of you who are aware of this comment by John Elway quite some time ago might remember it. But he said, he was talking about one of his coaches, and he said, if you rule by the stick and you direct, and you ask somebody to do something, they'll do it to ensure they meet your expectations, right? And but if they want to do it and they care and they know you care, they're not just going to try to meet your expectations, they're going to try to exceed them. And so it's the equivalent of telling someone jump 2 feet. And if they do it out of fear and direction, sometimes they'll jump your 2 feet. But you're missing sometimes you can be missing their willingness and ability to jump 5. And so this one, the quote by Eisenhower and inspiration is really trying to inspire people to be leaders in themselves and what they do.
Right.
And this other one for 1 week, and this is Mike and I got a kick out of talking about this one. For one, it's kind of a personal challenge that may unintentionally, but support a lot of the things we're talking about. And that's for 1 week. And this is hard for lawyers. For 1 week, try to avoid saying no, but, or however. And it's funny, since Mike and I have talked about this, I have challenged myself in the same way and caught myself a few times. Sometimes noticed I didn't catch myself. No seems like an easy one, but and however are usually the monikers of explanation. You can do that, but, and then you go in and you tell them how the watch is made, right?
Right.
You can do that, however, and then you go into all the reasons why they actually shouldn't do it. And sometimes it's not really helpful, and it doesn't help build all the trust. It's really hard because we, again, as lawyers, are burdened with the information, the context, and the risk that informs the conclusion, and we always fear that someone else doesn't understand that. But as a challenge, just try it. It's an interesting, and I actually think a great exercise in awareness to try to avoid saying no, but, or however.
Well, I think it also conveys to the business people a more positive view of the lawyers in-house and more thinking, like, because, can we do this campaign? Yes, but, or yes, however, you need to, blah, blah, blah. Just to think about before you give the answer is to lay it all out in a more positive manner. But it's a difficult test, but it's something that if you try it, you may be surprised at the results. But that probably brings us up to towards the end of the PowerPoint slideshow a little bit. But as we've been talking about throughout this webinar, and as Shaka has mentioned, I'm talking as well about leadership versus management. And people confuse the two and think about it in terms of your day-to-day work, which people confuse strategy with tactics. So with leadership and versus management, I like to make the distinctions. For example, when you're looking at that task or that problem, are you the composer or are you acting as a conductor? Does the circumstance require you to be the conductor or the composer? Something along that line. Are you looking at a problem with a telescope, long range view, future, or binoculars, just short field of vision, but very wide? Then you have the promised land or the carrot and the stick. You ask why versus asking how, right? The leader is in the why. Why are we doing this? Why should we be doing this? A manager will say, how should I get this done? Now, there's a time and place for management. Shaka and I will be the first to tell you that. But there's also a time and place for leadership. And often than not, you should recognize when that leadership is called for. You're fighting a war or are you fighting a battle? Are you talking tactics or are you talking strategy? Are you trying to be innovative with new technology, looking around the corner for your CEO or for your CLO? Or are we problem solving immediately, but again, not fixing the blame, we're fixing the problem? And then are we looking at a long-term issue or short-term? Are you in the present, management, or are you in the future with a purpose? Again, leadership. And then finally, I always think of lion versus tiger. And with the lion, think about that animal. He sits on the plain out in the open for everyone to see on the savannah. He's got a whole pride working for him, doing the work, bringing the prey. He's supervising when the pride will move to the next location. The tiger, he operates by stealth. He lays an ambush sometimes for his prey to come by and make a mistake and then pounces on them. Now, there are times when a manager has to point out shortcomings of his or her team. But more importantly, you want to be the noble lion sitting in the middle of the Serengeti, if you can get away with it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to John. And I'm with my computer screen when I was running the show, John, I couldn't see all the questions coming in. So maybe you could shoot them out to us or Shaka.
I'll ask a couple of them. I will say, Mike, of anybody that I've ever met in my life, you have the most analogies I've ever heard. They're all completely relevant, and I don't think I've ever heard the same analogy twice out of all the times we've been together. So I do love it. I love the trust leaves on a horse and returns by foot. That's really great analogy. So a couple of the questions. One question that I often hear, especially from people who are promoted from within, I'm going to direct this to Shaka, is once you're promoted from within, and all of a sudden you have peers now that you're leading, what's your advice to really earn their trust and have a seamless transition from associate general counsel to general counsel?
I guess taking that backwards, I don't know if I have the answers as to what a seamless transition looks like always. But I think the answer to all of the question is to keep trying. Different personalities are different. And that actually, the way you pose that question, it was a challenge, right? To go from being colleagues and peers. I mean, and coming back in a leadership role to a company where I was working with many of the people who now who are still at the company and work on my team, is to care, right? Is to be genuine, to express care, to have courage. Admittedly, I probably had some stops and some bumps and some failures and some pits, and I will continue to. I'll have some tomorrow, and I've had some yesterday, right? But to continue to try, to continue to appreciate that I'm not perfect, and that helps me kind of bounce back from mistakes and learn from mistakes. and to express care and a purpose. And then build your voice, uh, uh, build your leadership style, trust in yourself, right? And that one sometimes is a hard one. When you look across from a colleague and you feel like you want to defer, or you want to maybe give something away or not be too much of a leader, be too overbearing, and you find a balance. Um, in frankly, damn it, you keep trying.
The one
Yeah.
thing Mike shared with all of us is that you were put into the position, you were promoted into the position because you earned trust. Later in the presentation, you mentioned that you took on a lot of jobs that you didn't really like to do, but you took them on. So I'm thinking to myself, I think he got the job because he earned trust, but he did a lot of things that he may not have really wanted to do or others didn't want to do. What do you attribute your success to? Where do you how did you earn trust, and what do you think really made you that center of attention to be promoted to GC?
Mm. Uh, I mean, I think it's being consistent. I am an incredibly relationship-based person, and to me, in the roles that we have and the people we're around, if you're not focused on relationships with the company, with your team, with the people, then what are we doing? And I think that view plus staying true to things that I believe helps me avoid doing things that conflict, right? Sometimes one of the things trust is appreciating and expecting that someone is with you, somebody's has your interests in mind, someone's gonna do what they say. And I try not, I don't tell people I'm going to do something if I know I'm not or I can't. I don't try to lie, yeah, to say, oh, this is going to happen when in reality I think something else is going to happen. You try to be upfront, you try to be honest, and you try to stick to your values. And by doing that, it keeps things consistent, right? It's kind of like truth is the easiest story to keep telling the same way over and over.
It is. And John, I should also mention, having observed Shaka, but if you also notice, even in these answers, Shaka never says it's about him or I did this, I did that. It's the team.
Yeah.
He talked with a plural possessive, like, our team, people work with me. They don't work for me. A leader understands that dynamic, and that's that issue. And that's what makes people want to work and to excel under his leadership, whether it be at Sony or other organizations. So I hope if people are listening carefully, and I'm sure they are, that it's really something that a good leader shares the credit. And he'll talk about, our department had a good quarter, not I had a good quarter. That's very important for a leader to share with the team. Very
Yeah.
important.
That is just an absolute great point, Mike. One last question, then I'm going to give a quick interview tip because I like to give a tip after every one of these things. It says, can you give advice on how to handle very insecure leaders or managers? How do you convince them you are not a threat to them and have them be supportive of you?
I'll let Shaka, do you want to start that first, since you
Sure.
probably have managers above you that were maybe insecure? Not me, of course, but
No. Thinking about it in an upward direction, and I think it was in either somewhere in the comments or maybe we said it because it's kind of become a buzzword, but it's one that I believe in, and that's servant leadership. And that can work both directions, right? We can be a leader to the person we want to support. We can be a leader to the people that are supporting us. But in all instances, we're supporting, whether it's people who report to us or we report to. And so being consistent and genuine, sometimes one of the challenges is the personalities we're dealing with. So if somebody sees someone as a threat, oftentimes that's their own perception of the circumstances. And all you can really do is control what you can control. So supporting, being supportive, saying and doing the things that need to express that level of support, and continuing to be consistent with that. It's not the type of thing that happens overnight. It's nobody trusts someone because they say trust me, right?
Hmm.
It's that's not what creates it. And so you just have to continue to exhibit the behaviors and do the things and be deliberate about trying to express um, support, regardless of the direction.
I think the theme of what you're saying throughout the whole hour is consistency. Seems to, telling the truth. You have a trouble getting into trouble when you're telling the truth, and consistent behavior. So I do
Right.
love that. So I want to give one quick interview tip. So one of my genius candidates came up with this, so I didn't come up with this, but it goes in line with what you guys are talking about from a leader, is getting your team to figure things out and not feeding them the answer. So the one question CEOs can tend to stump GC candidates as they say, what are your weaknesses? And my tip or recommendation isn't to talk about a weakness you're going to bring with you to the new job, is talk about a weakness maybe you had and you've learned how to be better at it. So now it's made you a much better leader. And this one individual, when I asked him, what would you say when you're asked, what is your weakness? He gave the greatest answer I've ever heard. He said, one of my weaknesses was when I became general counsel is I like to feed answers to my team. I like to give them the solution and say, here's the answer, go fix it. Now, this is what I thought was amazing. He said, what that was doing was preventing them from building problem-solving muscle. I've never heard that term before, problem-solving muscle. So he goes, I had to learn to stay quiet, give them the problem, let them figure it out. And what ultimately happened, because as I say, you want to talk how you're a better person or how things are better after you figure out how to resolve your weakness. What ultimately happened is my entire team became the best business-minded lawyers and served the business by coming up with better solutions than anyone would think of, by allowing them to build this problem-solving muscle. So think about that. Like when you're giving a weakness, make sure it's past tense and make sure you talk in terms of how it's made you better at your position. And I love this person's answer of helping his team build that problem-solving muscle. So I thought that was terrific. You guys were terrific. Mike, you're always a pleasure and always have me laughing. I'm glad I have my volume off. I love, as I say, the raise the flag problem. That was a new problem to me. I wasn't quite sure how we were getting to the answer. Anyway, really great stuff. And Shaka, you're terrific. I hope Sony doesn't mind, but now you're on my radar, and I'm gonna probably be reaching out to you from time to time. And anybody else out there, if they're looking for some either career advice, coaching, people like Mike are just unbelievable. They've been in the seat. They know the problems you're facing. They'll be able to give you guidance better than anybody else out there, any other type of career coach. So think about that. If you're looking to make a strategic hire or looking to make a move, think of Barker-Gilmore. That we're all about doing the right thing for people. So it's all about what's best for your career. We make a lot of placements, so it's not, we don't live fee by fee over here. We're trying to do the right thing for people. And so I want to thank everyone for attending, and make sure you check us out, sign up for the October 30th webinar, and also keep in mind, Averill will have the slides and the recording posted for everyone in the next couple of weeks. Keep an eye out. All that said, we're finishing up a few minutes early, give some people free time before their next meeting on their calendar. But feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're happy to help, and we look forward to seeing everyone again. Thanks again.
Thank you.